Hello and welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. This is a show where we take the legendarium created by J.R.R. Tolkien and have a good, simple, wholesome chat about it. Sometimes it's a drunk person, me, trying to explain stories or events, and sometimes it's breaking down the stories and concepts as if we're talking to a drunk person. I'm Chris, I'm an avid Tolkien nerd, I'm still learning and realising how much I actually don't know. And joining me is your co-host and my lovely wife Rebecca. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Rebecca, a complete novice to all things Tolkien and nerdy in general. Although now I've watched all 3 films, extended editions, and can now confirm that I have been converted to the religion headed by L. Ron Hubbard.
Long may he live. Right.
Sultan.
That's the intro sorted. Let's get into today's episode. Okay, right, we're live. Hello. How are you?
I'm good, yeah. I feel really healthy because I've had some cucumber.
I also made you a bacon and egg sandwich with that, and it was very salty. I feel like I'm dying.
Yeah, but it's like 50-50, isn't it? You have some cucumber, you balance it out with a bacon and egg sandwich. You have some sweet, you follow it by savoury. You've got to always have balance.
You're full of shit. Straight up full of shit. With this our first episode where it's unconnected to the Silmarillion, like the story of the Silmarillion mainly, we're just going to talk about something different today. How are you feeling about the Silmarillion so far with everything we've covered?
Good, I'm still useless at names.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, I'm feeling good, looking at something different to give me a palate cleanse.
Well, before we get into that, so just for anyone who's about to switch off, we're going to talk about Orcs this week, but there is a couple of notes I wanted to make. Firstly, regarding like previous episodes and what have you. Unconnected to that, though, is we started watching the Hobbit films this week. Bit of a different... Well, was it different for you watching it now that we've been doing this podcast? Because it's been... Last time you watched it was before we started. Back in January, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can appreciate the film The Hobbit much more than I used to. And I've been able to stay awake more.
Yeah.
So, like, I've been making a conscious effort to stay awake during The Hobbit instead of putting The Hobbit on and just it being a background noise to go to sleep to.
It's good popcorn watching. But as I was saying to you the other day, like, I did spend an inordinate amount of time explaining to you, it kind of happens like this, but not quite like that in the book, or this is how the lore actually is. So yeah, it's one of those ones where I could spend a stupid amount of time just unpicking the threads.
I mean, you didn't have to. I didn't ask you to do that. We could have just watched it like normal people watch a film.
No, I'm not a normal person, and I refuse to. God help you if we ever watch Rings of Power together. God help you. When the baby was dead young, I used to sit with her in my arms and watch it on a morning, like every Friday, and I'd tell her about it, so you've got no fucking chance. Anyway, firstly, an update to the episode about the dwarves. I was able to track down, in one of the books I already own, which is Volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth by Christopher Tolkien. In it says that the dwarf fathers walk with their wives, except Durin, who walk alone. So 6 of the dwarf fathers had their wives with them when they woke up, except Durin. And we've been listening to the Song of Durin quite a lot, because there's that Spotify playlist I've made where those people perform the Song of Durin and Misty Mountains and stuff.
That's been our new white noise.
Yeah, it has, yeah, it's great. But one of the first lines is literally like, Durin woke and walked alone. So it's been staring us in the face this whole time. Oh well, I found further to that, just on the subject of dwarves, I found a suggestion that Durin gathered his clan by taking in wanderers and members of other clans and building it that way. And I then found a further note that said, perhaps, after the sinking of Beleriand at the end of the First Age, that the dwarven cities of Nogrod and Belagost, which were mainly the Firebeards and the Broadbeam families, that they had some left over who joined the Longbeards, like Durin's clan, because they were, like, that's how they could. But anyway, you haven't made a mistake if you're just listening in. It's not about dwarves today, it is about orcs, but I just wanted to clear that up. Orcs, quite famously, a race that dwarves don't really get on with. Well, and it's kind of more than just like they're whole orcs and they're horrible, just like men and elves is the same. There is actually a pretty compelling reason why dwarves really don't like them, but we'll get into that later. So, what do you know about orcs before we get into this? Like, what are your experiences with orcs?
They are twisted elves.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
They are very ugly.
Mm.
There's only 2 of them that I would class as attractive so far.
One of them was in The Hobbit, wasn't it?
Both of them.
Or was
in
it
Hobbit.
Azog and...
Azog and the guy that Azog throws off the side of the cliff.
Oh, the one who says, like, I was the only one who survived, and he's like, shame, and then kills him.
Yeah.
Alright, okay.
They're the only attractive orcs.
Mm.
So I feel sorry for orc women, who are equally as unattractive.
How do you know that? You've never seen an orc woman.
I have.
Have you?
Yeah.
Where?
I don't know, but I'm sure you said to me one time that they could possibly be orc women when we're watching Lord of the Rings.
But in the films, it's because the orcs had to be shorter than the actors. So a lot of women and kids played orcs, but they're all canonically male orcs that you see in the films. But there is orc women, but we just don't see them, just like we don't see dwarf women.
Right. Okay.
But have you encountered orcs anywhere else apart from Lord of the Rings?
Warhammer.
Yeah, I love those orcs.
Just purely like they look goblin-like.
Yeah, spelled with a K. Oh, World of Warcraft as well.
Yeah.
The orcs are there, big, beefy lads and lasses.
They're literally the only orcs I've come across. Like, there's no Real Housewives of Orcs. There's no, Miracle on Orc Streak. Oops.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be so good if we had like orc telly. Warhammer 40k orcs are my favourite. Just because they're they're just football hooligans. They just love it's just Football Factory on steroids in space.
There's no orc in Paris.
Is that because you've been watching Emily in Paris? It is, isn't it? You were watching it earlier when I came into the bedroom. Right, let's go into some etymology, names, your favourite part of every episode. Where does the word orc come from? As usual, there's a few different origins, and they all might be wrong. I might be wrong about all of them. Tolkien was almost certainly, possibly wrong about one of them. So first and foremost, I found in my research that orc is regarded as an Old English word for evil spirit, except that kind of came from a mistake as far as I could see. Orc is actually the Old English word for a metal cup, but in a book that came out in 1898, it was an Old English dictionary. The word orc, meaning metal cup, and the Latin word orcus, meaning after like one of the gods of the underworld, were conflated in the same entry, so it looked like the word orc meant evil spirit, even though it was actually referring to orcus in Latin. And this was corrected in later versions, but that might have been one of the books that Tolkien read, and he thought orc meant evil spirit because he was an expert on Old English as well. So it's just, but it's one of those things that's like retroactively true, because now orc is to refer to an evil being.
I was going to say, so do you think he was like the first to create the character of an orc?
I don't know, because orcus was used to refer to evil giants. So I don't know, like he didn't invent the concept of elves, dwarves or fairies, but his take on it has been adapted so many times that it's almost like he might not be the originator, but he's like the classic experience of it.
Okay.
So, but yeah, So one thing that I found interesting was in this book that was published in 1898, one of the authors was called Tollers. So I swear down, yeah. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, we've come full circle just for this podcast. So, but nobody can, that's the etymology of the word orc. There's the orcus in Latin, which means evil giant, evil spirit, after one of the gods of the underworld in some religion or another. There's the Old English word for metal cup, and somewhere along the lines a mistake was made. There is also a Norse influence that was put forward, but I disregarded that because it was kind of said that it was disproven, and even Tolkien knew it wasn't right. So I just kind of
omitted.
Yeah, but I did also find a fun fact that evil giant might still be in use today with things like the orca whale, because because that's got the word orc in it. So obviously it doesn't refer to a big metal cup. So yeah, but anyway, we're here for drunk history of Middle Earth. We're not fucking full scholars. This is for the pub. Now, you said earlier that orcs came from elves. Is that your final answer?
Well, clearly not, because of the tone of your voice. But that's what you told me. So you've obviously just been dumbing this down.
Well, I told you what was written in the Silmarillion, as published by Christopher Tolkien. But Tolkien, John Tollers, was writing his whole life up until he died. And towards the end of his life, he started to spell orcs with a K. He started to revise a lot of things. So I'm going to take you through some of the possible origins of orcs as we know them. And then we're going to get into what they're like as a people. And we're going to discuss their history as well through First, Second and Third Age. So this one comes as a surprise, but nobody can really agree on where orcs come from in Middle-earth. Shock horror, I know. There are competing theories, and the most popular, and the one that gets told the most, is that Morgoth twisted captured elves into orcs through slow cruelty. I am going to be upfront and I say, thematically and from a logic point of view, I believe this one, because it would make the most sense, and it would be the saddest one. Because we've said before that, like, Morgoth making the orcs was regarded as the worst thing he's ever done, and the one that Eru hates the most.
Well, he was kidnapping the elves as well.
So, because Morgoth can't make life, and he cannot make anything new. Like, everything's a twisted mockery of something else, right? Trolls are a twisted mockery of Ents. Dragons, I have no fucking idea what dragons are a twisted mockery of, but something, I'm sure. You know, you've got, like, orcs are the twisted version of elves, possibly. So it's twisted versions of something else. And we know for a fact that orcs do procreate like the other children of Iluvatar. So Tollers himself wrote in a letter to...
Which Tollers now?
to a certain... I can't remember who he wrote it to, but he said, "There must have been orc women, but in stories that seldom, if ever, see the orcs except as soldiers of armies in the service of evil lords. So we naturally would not learn much about their lives. Not much was known." But he did confirm that there was orc women. But he's saying himself, like, I've got this whole world here, you're never going to know everything. Look at, like, what happened to Ungoliant? Where did the Blue Wizards go? What's in Harad? What's in the East? You know, like, these things we're never really going to know. Another theory, though, so we'll move away from the most popular ones and we'll go through the others. And you'll see... I'll tell you what, why don't after each one you tell me how likely you think it could be? Another theory is that orcs were made from the ground by Morgoth. In some of the earliest versions of Tolkien's writing that started in between 1916 and 1917 when he was on leave from the army, they were mentioned of having granite hearts. And this part was funny because, again, if he did make them from stone, it would be a twisted mockery of what Aule had done.
Yeah, and it would mean that he would consciously have to be active in controlling them. Yes,
he wouldn't be able to give them... no, you've hit onto something here. So, Morgoth can do the things that they say. He does do that, the same as Aule did. Morgoth can do it better because... do you know the reason that Morgoth's so afraid of the other Valar is because his sickness and that is spread out over the world and he puts his power into the world?
Yeah.
So he disseminates his being. So, like, the dragons can go and act by themselves because they're being controlled by a part of his will that he's disseminated into the earth, into the world. So it's described as like Sauron has made the One Ring, but Arda is Morgoth's
Why am
ring.
I always wrong? Like, why is this? Because there's always an extra part. It's like, oh, well, sorry, that you're not right, because logically, yeah, that would make sense, but this is Tolkien, so it's definitely not going to be logical.
Well... you're learning, so I'm going to put the building blocks in, and then we're starting to build on those building blocks now. But the idea of them coming out of the ground was an early draft of the Legendarium, and obviously a fuck ton changed. Melkor at this stage was called Melkor, so that's what he was in the earliest draft. Old Melkor.
Sounds like a cereal brand.
It makes me think of Wilkinson's. I'm going down to Melkor.
Netto.
Melkor, Netto, yeah. Another theory is that... them being made from the ground, how likely do you think that would be?
It could be likely because it's been seen before.
Oh, okay, yeah. Another theory is that when Melkor saw the elves for the first time, he went away and made the orcs on his own as a twisted mockery. They're still made of stone, but it's moved on in terms of origin. They're not just come out of the ground because he wants them. He saw the elves, said, I'm going to make that, and then went away and did it. How likely do you think that one would be?
More likely than him just making them on his own accord. Because they are a similar shape to elves.
Yeah.
And he always likes to disprove his father or do the opposite. So I feel like he's always trying to prove himself to his dad in a weird way.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's like a form of flattery to his dad, but in imitation, but also like, but it's going to be my way.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah. That makes sense. And do you know what? I'm quite happy because this proves how much you've learned that you're able to like reason this through. So you go, girl. Another one, and I'd say this is probably one of the more fucked up theories because I like animals. But another possible origin is that orcs were a pre-existing race that Morgoth twisted physically and dominated to his will by dispersing his power into them. And I think the example given is teaching parrots to talk and using his like cruelty to twist them into the shape of orcs, which that could be like horrible. I think we'll get into it later, but there was someone who really pissed Tolkien off who made orcs bird-like, and he really did not react well to that. So for that reason, I don't think that theory will have much water, except it could have some credibility because orcs acted without Morgoth directly controlling them, like Aule had to do with the dwarves before Eru gave them life. But orcs often criticised and laughed and rebelled against their masters and fought amongst each other. So a possible origin was that they were already living beings that could do their own thing, and then Morgoth twisted them and taught them how to speak. An equivalent for this theory is the eagles, because Manwë made them bigger. Spirit, like some of the eagles were bigger and taught to speak. Why? But
I just don't think that's feasible.
Yeah.
Because if they already existed, why would Tolkien make it such a big thing of writing in that the dwarves had to be put to sleep until the elves awoke? And why wouldn't there be like a solid origin story if that was the case? I feel like orcs and sort of Melkor's actions are things that develop and grow as Tolkien, like, as he feels, instead of like solid ideas that he definitely puts on a page, like as if like Melkor actually exists. Like even Tolkien can't decide on his actions because it's so erratic.
Well, I mean, it was a living world. Like, I'd say it's probably one of, if not the best developed fantasy world, well, fictional world we've ever seen. Hence, this podcast. Aye. Another theory was basically the same as the elves, except this time Morgoth corrupted men before men were on the scene in the Silmarillion. Because we haven't got there in the story yet, right? We haven't met men yet. But, they're not awake yet in this point in our story. But we haven't really seen any orcs either. So there was also, how likely do you think that is?
Nah.
No twisted men. Fair dues. A mixed origin was presented where some Maiar took the form of orcs. So some of the evil spirits that fell in with Melkor took on the form of orcs physically and then procreated with corrupted elves and corrupted men. So it's just kind of mixing.
Oh, this is just getting far too complicated. And I take back what I said about twisted men, because that would make sense in terms of men have free will.
Yeah.
And can act on their own, so...
Well, elves can as well, but just not to the same degree as men. It's just elves.
But what size are orcs in comparison to humans and elves?
Just a little bit smaller, generally, but some are a little bit bigger.
A little bit smaller than elves?
No, a little bit. Well, yeah, elves and Tolkien are no really different in stature to men. It's not even sure 100% if they had pointy ears. It's just they are much more like beautiful people. They're not like any taller or anything.
Right. Well, us men are ugly. So let's just go for men.
Speak for yourself. I'm what's called a fucking Durham 10.
I mean, I'm sorry, but like a naked woman, like the form of a naked woman is like aesthetically pleasing.
Yes.
But you look at a naked man.
Which man? Ryan Reynolds?
Most men.
Ryan
if you
Reynolds.
lined like all men up and just like in like naked, no.
Well, that's
It's just not aesthetically pleasing.
Is it even being a closeted bisexual if you're just stating this? Anyway.
It's been said by a lot of people.
Yeah, anyway. Breaking news. Wife finds my penis ugly. What did orcs look like? So if you've got the films, right? So do you want to describe what the films orcs look like for that one person who's never seen Lord of the Rings film but listening to the podcast?
They just look like dirty. I mean, they're pointy-eared in the film, aren't they?
Yeah.
So dirty, pointy-eared, greeny, blacky, sort of coloured complexion. Like to collect pans and pots and things that clang together.
It's a lot of metal.
They're not very quiet
No.
when they move.
No. Well, those are, like, I'd say those are the iconic appearances, right?
Very muddy.
Yes, dirty, industrious, like cobbled together. Yeah, just twisted, rotten bastards. There's a quote coming up where this has been used to accuse Tolkien of being a racist, and
oh no.
No. Well, I don't. Yeah, again, I'm just going to straight out say I don't think that's the case. Given everything else he did in his life and what we talked about last week as well with
Nazis.
the way. Yeah, exactly. So we'll just get into it. In letter 210. Tolkien was writing a letter to someone where he was annoyed about a proposed film treatment in 1958 of Lord of the Rings that had been given to him. Someone had said, "Here's my proposed Lord of the Rings film." And he was very annoyed because this cunt had wanted to give the orcs beaks and turn them into birds, like, and give them feathers. But also another thing that was...
This was the thing before you mentioned about the birds.
Yeah, well, this was... so in this script still... by someone called Morton Grady Zimmerman.
Not to highlight you, by the way.
Yeah.
We're not just trying to publicly pull your name through the gutter.
Morton Grady Zimmerman
still exists.
He's probably dead. But anyway, I googled his name and all I could find was just this script. People talking about this script. But anyway, in this script, Zimmerman wanted there to be a fairy castle. Lothlorien was a palace, not a forest. The orcs had beaks and feathers. Faramir at one point was a floating body. There was magic incantations. Radagast was an eagle. The magic had like flashing blue light and just a bunch of mad shit, right? And so Tolkien was writing about this in a letter, and he was defending, his creations by describing what they would actually look like relative to the medieval fantasy world. And this is the controversial quote, or quote unquote controversial quote. Quote unquote controversial quote. Fuck me, say that 10 times fast. He described the orcs as squat, broad, flat-nosed, sallow-skinned, with wide mouths and slant eyes. In fact, degraded and repulsive versions of the, to Europeans, least lovely Mongol types. Which, out of context, if you're describing someone as looking like a Mongolian, and then we take that into the historical context. In the 13th and 14th century in Europe, right, the Mongolians invaded Poland in particular. I don't know how far they got, but Tolkien was a big history nerd. Lord of the Rings is ostensibly a medieval fantasy setting, and that was what would be fucking terrifying to European people at that time, is being invaded by this army that look different to you, and they just want to kill you. Like Genghis Khan, like he's responsible for like 1/10 of the population or something. Like that guy. So the armies were fucking huge, and he was everywhere. So you can imagine that'd be pretty terrifying. So given that this was a fictional history, it's not too far-fetched to think that, one of the enemies of medieval Europe, which would be Middle-earth, would look like that. So, fair dues. But I'd go a step further as well, right, in that it says... this is my own interpretation, in that it comes back to beauty standards. So if elves are described as like fair, pale, and all of these things, then naturally what they would consider to be not beautiful would be something that, if they're tall and fair...
non-symmetrical face.
Yeah, exactly. It would be short, like ugly, darker skinned and what have you. Like that would be, fearful. It's just that human or mortal reaction of fearing something that doesn't look like you. Then you add into it the fantasy tropes of that orcs are inherently corrupted anyway, going away from just their physical appearance. Like I mentioned, I don't think there's much weight in saying that Tolkien's racist, because, he scorned Nazi Germany when they asked if he was Aryan, and he pointed out how stupid they were. topical Diane Abbott, a British politician, has just been, she's been sacked, but saying that Jewish people didn't face as much racism as like black people or whatever. And Tolkien was saying, clapping back to the Nazis, saying, regretfully, he says, I have Jewish friends, but regretfully I'm not of that descent of those wonderful people. So like, nah, if anti-Semitism and racism are hand in hand with the same thing, then I really don't think Tolkien was a racist. I think it's just a fantasy author of a medieval society given a stereotypical description of what a fantasy enemy of a medieval society would look like. But
Let me just take 5 minutes to process everything you've just said there.
The gist is...
Sounded like a tongue twister.
The gist is, I don't think he's any of the ists or phobics we'd put on people today. That's my take on it. Would you like a quick history of the Orcs?
Yes, please.
Orcs were first seen in Beleriand. No, I'm joking. Orcs were first seen in Beleriand after the awakening of the elves at Cuiveanen. The dwarves that are from the cities I've already mentioned, the Nogrod and Belagost, which was the Firebeards and the Broadbeams, told the elves that the Orcs had come from Angband. And I reckon, right, do you remember last episode where I said that... not Angband. Well, yeah, so the Orcs had come from Angband, but in Angband and Autumno, the Valar didn't look everywhere, so evil things were able to escape. Like, they were able to just get away because the Valar were only looking for Melkor. I think the Orcs could have been some of the ones that got away, and then they were first seen after that. And it was, they were the first things that elves fought on Middle-earth when they came back across from a man. So, in a short version, I know our last episode we left off with the chaining of Melkor for 3 ages. In those 3 ages, the elves go across to Valinor, come back. Most of them make it back across and live there for a while. One of them is born, called Feanor, absolute dipshit. Although some people believe he did nothing wrong. I don't. I think he was an asshole. Feanor grows up, is the greatest craftsman to ever live, makes 3 beautiful jewels called the Silmarils. Morgoth gets released, wants the Silmarils more than anything, kills the 2 trees, steals the Silmarils, goes to Middle-earth, right? So Feanor and his 7 sons swear an oath that they will always hunt the Silmarils and follow Morgoth to Middle-earth. When they land in a place called, I think it's called like Lamoth, the first things they fight in Middle-earth are Orcs. And that's the first battle on Middle-earth soil that elves fight, which... Unfortunately, it's not the first thing elves kill, because just before that, Feanor kills a load of other elves because they won't give them the ships. The fucker. But in the first, second, and third age, Orcs form the main host of Morgoth and then Sauron's armies. They're like the carbs of bad guys. Like, they're there to fill out the main bulk of the force. Right. Like, if it's a Chinese, like the Orcs are the right. Probably not a good fucking analogy when we've just been talking about Mongolians.
Maybe it's just cut that bit out.
Nah. So, if you're having a Chinese meal, right, you got your Orcs, your rice, or your chips, like, to make up the main bulk of your plate.
Easy disposable.
Yeah, exactly. And then your dragons are like your prawn toast, your fucking premium items.
Your protein.
Yeah, your Balrogs are your good shit.
When you go to the all-you-can-eat buffet, you don't get chips or rice.
I do.
But if you want to eat the buffet, as they say...
it's a character flaw, but
you get the protein, because you get the most expensive things. Seafood.
I think we're getting a little bit lost in this. I shouldn't have mentioned Chinese.
I've got hungry.
Yeah. Anyway, whilst there are more powerful servants and more dangerous servants, Orcs are the main bulk of the force of all evil armies in Middle-earth, pretty much. In the Third Age, one of the Orcs' capitals and largest populations was in Mount Gundabad, and they'd been there since Sauron invaded northwest Middle-earth in the Second Age. If you look on the map we've got, up here in Eriador, there used to be a land called Eregion, where the elves had a kingdom. Sauron invaded that just after the forging of the Great Rings, and can you see here... where the Misty Mountains go up, and then right near the top at the northern bit, that's where Gundabad is. And this is a bad place for the Orcs to invade, because Gundabad was the place that Durin woke up from at the beginning of his life. So it's a holy place for the dwarves, And even though Durin woke up there, he then walked south until he found Keled Zaram, saw the stars above his head, and then settled Moria as Khazad-dûm. The dwarves still regarded it, and
that's like a pilgrimage
it's a
site.
it's a holy place. So dwarves lived there, and then they had to flee to Khazad-dûm and join some of the other clans that had settled there when the Orcs invaded. They only invaded Gundabad because the dwarves of Khazad-dûm had shut the doors to them. So, do you know the doors, the hidden doors in the films?
Yeah.
Sauron couldn't get through them. His armies couldn't get through them. So he said, right, just go and fucking harass the other dwarves. So if the dwarves needed another reason to hate the Orcs, this is it. Like, they really fucking hate Orcs because of this. Like, they desecrated their holy place. And that spurred their hatred. So there's been big wars throughout Middle-earth, but one of the biggest wars fought is the War of Dwarves and Orcs, which is in about 2700 of the Third Age of Middle-earth. And that's fought outside of Khazad-dûm. And I think that's where, if I'm not getting it wrong, that's the one where Dane Ironfoot kills Azog the Defiler when he's really young. And it's really unexpected for a dwarf when he's only about 32. And Dane goes on to become king of Erebor after Thorin dies in the events of The Hobbit. But they can't take back Moria at that time because Dane takes one look inside Moria after they win the fight outside and he's like, nah, fuck that. You can sense there's something wrong. Like, you can sense the Balrog. And the Orcs obviously have fled back inside Moria, the ones that survived. But yeah, Mount Gundabad is one of their biggest population centres. Then you've got Mordor Orcs. You've got other Misty Mountain Orcs. But what's noteworthy about them, about Orcs in general, is that they would often fight amongst themselves and they would rebel against orders. Like, even though they are dominated creatures and by fear and force, sometimes they'll just ignore orders or not take them to the frustration of their masters. Like,
that sounds, I like it.
Well,
we wouldn't be probably in as shit as we would let me start again. We wouldn't be in as much of a mess of a country if we rebelled against stupid decisions. Like, just because you're more powerful doesn't mean that you're always right.
Yeah, true. No, that's true.
You should be challenged throughout your whole life, no matter who you are, because without being challenged, you never grow.
Yeah, well, Orcs didn't have they didn't have media getting us to fight each other and focus on things like identity politics to distract us from rich people gutting fucking public services and all that. But hey ho. So a good example of Orcs rebelling against orders is, do you know when Merry and Pippin are being taken to Isengard?
Yeah.
By the Uruk-hai. It's the Orcs from Mordor that try to
eat them.
Yeah, they try and kill and eat them. Regardless of what they're being told to do, they're just hungry. And they're like, yeah, they don't need their legs. But they're not super disciplined. Like, they're forced by fear. Like, the strongest Orcs are the leaders or the most ruthless, and you generally climb the hierarchy by killing your superior.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
Yeah. But paradoxically, it's because of this cruelty and this corruption inherent to them that they're super easy to bend to someone's will. Even though I've just talked about them rebelling, Sauron had no problems bending them to his will, even though they were Morgoth's creations. For instance, Sauron had to corrupt Numenor over, I think it's either 54 or 57 years after he gets to Numenor. So Numenor was a massive military might in the Second Age, right? And they get an army together. Ar-Pharazôn, I think it's Ar-Pharazôn, or his dad, gets an army together, marches to Mordor. Sauron's armies fuck off because they see how powerful the Numenorians are. Sauron just says, yeah, I'll come with you willingly. He gets made a prisoner. 54 years later, he slowly convinces the Numenorians to try and invade Valinor. That it took them 54 years to do that. Sauron can't dominate dwarves at all. He has to get people to worship him in Harad and the east. He tried to bribe the dwarves. None of that with the Orcs. Just straight up, just bend them to his will. He could straight up dominate their will with his powers and Maya. So yeah, it's interesting that it's their numbers and their cruelty that makes them dangerous. It's not really their inherent qualities. But there's such an interesting fact as well. Orc language, we'll talk about. They're such a fractious people that they can't speak to each other between tribes. So Misty Mountain Orcs they can't communicate with Mordor Orcs using Orc language. They have to use the common speech.
So they're proper tribe-like.
Yeah, except their common speech, like they butcher it and make it sound awful just because of how they are. No, as you can imagine, that is a big subject to cover. So that was just a whip through the origins of orcs and a little overview of their race. There's other things we could go into and speculate on, like why they feel so weak in the sun. My take is because they're creatures of darkness. They don't like to move in sunlight, so hence why Mordor is covered in like belching smoke and stuff
Maybe
like that.
Maybe they just like sunbathing instead of like working out.
Yeah.
Like when it's hot and sunny, I'm the same.
Yeah, orcs, like everyone thinks they hate the sun. It turns out they just love it so much that they can't get anything else done.
And as well, if they've got dirty skin or they don't wash, like they're not going to be interested in going out in the sun, are they?
Aye, true. So, what would you say is your favourite origin story for orcs if you could choose between them and have any of them be true?
I would probably say that they are... it's either between twisted elves or twisted men.
Alright, fair enough. My favourite one is the Maiar mating with corrupted elves and corrupted men. I would like that one because it makes it all the sadder because it's not just one race being corrupted and twisted, it's three. It's like the spirits of like Eru and the children of Iluvatar, and they've been utterly corrupted.
It's just making me feel a bit sick thinking about weird... Like, I don't know, I think the Maiar are like weird creatures and it just makes us feel sick of them mating.
Well, one of the most beautiful women ever, Luthien, she was the daughter of a Maiar and an elf. And her son, Dior, I think he was called, is described as one of the most fair creatures to ever live because he is a product of humans, elves and Maiar. Because his dad was a human, his mum was
right. You're talking yourself out of your answer though, because
right.
Orcs are minging.
Yeah, but no. But we've talked before about how
you've just got to pick an attractive Maiar to get an attractive.
No. The point that I'm trying to make is that it makes the story more tragic in that these things are corrupted because just like we've mentioned, you can't appreciate freedom without suffering a lack of it. It's these things, so like the elves become more beautiful for the sorrow and grief that they endure and the wisdom that they gather through these experiences. So the idea of something like that being corrupted is kind of, I think it just brings more tragedy to the story rather than them just being created from nothing or like Earth. But yeah, that was a whip shot through a bit of history, origins of the orcs in Middle Earth, if you wondered where they came from when you're watching Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Should have mentioned this at the top of the episode. Anytime you hear the word orc, you can replace it with goblin.
Or a shot.
Huh?
Or a shot.
A shot?
Yeah, a shot.
No, don't do it. Don't do a shot. No, don't do a shot every time you hear the word orc in this episode. Fuck no. Jesus. I do want to get drunk and talk about The Hobbit though. The Hobbit movies. That would be fun for me. That might be one in future. Thank you for sticking with us on that little whip round journey. As always, feel free to join our Discord server or give us an email at lotradhome@gmail.com. Would you like to hear your fun fact for this episode, Rebecca?
Go on then.
Are you familiar with a band called Led Zeppelin?
Yes.
So those famous lads. Stairway to Heaven, I'm always playing it. I'm playing it on Spotify. I can't play it on guitar, but it's a song. It's the Forbidden Riff.
Yes.
Well, would it surprise you to know that they've got a shitload of songs inspired by Tolkien and Middle Earth, and they actually name drop Gollum and Mordor?
Are these available on Spotify?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I was listening to one in the garden. The other day when we were like playing with the kid, and I wanted to see if you'd noticed, but you didn't. So 4 songs that I just quickly rounded up that have got Middle Earth influences or Tolkien influences is a song called Ramble On, which name drops Gollum, I think. Misty Mountain Hop, Over the Hills and Far Away, and this last song is about Return of the King. It's called The Battle of Evermore. The lads who wrote, like, they'd sit and write the songs, and they would sit and look out at the same places where Tolkien would write, because Tolkien used to like go and write under trees and stuff.
Yeah.
So they go to the same places and they'd write their Led Zeppelin songs.
Oh, little nerds.
Yeah, and they said that later on they felt like a bit ashamed for taking so much inspiration, but they said it was really comforting to go and like write loads of songs. They were just massive Lord of the Rings fans, so a lot of Led Zeppelin songs are influenced by Lord of the Rings or Middle Earth. So the weird thing is, right, I mentioned Stairway to Heaven, and in that there is a line about looking to the west, and I always thought that was about Valinor, but I don't know if I could find any evidence to back that up. But like, now that I know how many other songs are influenced by Tolkien, that might just be an accidental one where like it might have been like no intention for it to be a reference, but it's like there's a feeling I get as I look to the west, and it always reminds me of when Saruman dies in the book and his spirit looks to the west before Manwë sends a cold wind to blow him, like dissipate him, because he can't go home. But
fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fault them for getting inspiration from Middle Earth. I mean, we sit and talk about it for an hour every week. At least they're making some fucking money.
An hour? Are you joking?
An hour. We record for about 45 minutes, but I talk to you about it. I send you memes and that, actually.
My days are filled with memes of Lord of the Rings. I listen to you all day talking about Lord of the Rings. You send me articles about Lord of the Rings.
Well, isn't your life fucking terrible?
No, it's all Lord of the Rings.
Anyway, we're going to have to go because our marriage counselling session's next. So we'll say goodbye for this week. As usual, on, I don't know what day I'm going to release this episode, but a couple of days after will be part 2 of Drunk Watch of The Fellowship of the Ring. It's just a re-edit and much more cleaned up version of the first couple of episodes we released, but I'm releasing it in a staggered order now just because it didn't meet the quality that these episodes do now. Ha ha ha, if you're an audio nerd. I know there's probably an audio nerd listening, like, what fucking quality.
And I feel like this episode's been really random as well, so I don't feel like it's been like as concise as the other ones have possibly been because of all the different possibilities
that
the Orcs.
It's a relaxed episode. Like, it has to be, because we're talking about a whole history of a people and a concept. Like, how could you talk about the history of Britain in 46 minutes? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but it's also quite concrete. Whereas the history of Orcs, like, you've given like 4 or 5 different possibilities.
Yeah.
So make your own decision on this one.
Yeah, I've given you the tools. Next time you watch the films, perhaps maybe you decide for yourself what is most fun for them to be.
And as long as they don't have beaks, I'm sure old Tollers will not be, trying to escape from his grave to come in.
So they're on about remaking the Lord of the Rings films again, or more Lord of the Rings films. And if at any point they're bird-like, we could probably power Britain on him spinning in his grave. But on that note, I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to say goodbye from me.
And goodbye from Rebecca.
And have a good day wherever you are.